Greetings, everyone. My name is Florence Denens-Habeck, Pharmacovigilance and Ergomed Head of Marketing. We are glad you could join us today for our Pharmacovigilance webinar series. Today's webinar is titled The Impact of COVID on Pharmacovigilance. Before we commence, I would like to run through a couple of quick housekeeping matters. Firstly, we expect this webinar presentation to run for approximately 40 minutes, with a short amount of time for question and answer at the end. And secondly, you are very welcome to send us your question at any point throughout the presentation. You can do so by typing them into the Q&A section available on your screen. Our agenda for today will cover impact of COVID-19 pandemic on global pharma companies, update on EU pharmacovigilance legislation with respect to COVID-19, detailed guidance on ICSRs in the context of COVID-19, COVID-19 terms to MedDRA, pharmacovigilance activity with respect to COVID-19 vaccine, and to finish a Q&A section. And now I would like to introduce you to our speakers, Dr. Marcela Fialova, Pharmacovigilance Senior Director, EU QPPV, UK QPPV, Dr. Jana Hyankova, Pharmacovigilance Director, EU QPPV, UK QPPV. I will now let our first speaker take over from here.
Okay, thank you very much, Flo, for introducing me. So let's come to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on global pharma companies. Let's look in pharmacovigilance. I'm not gonna mention here definitions, but everybody can know that PV has significant impact on public health, and which is pretty common. We can understand it perfectly. What we had to learn during a period of COVID-19, this is prioritization of pharmacovigilance activities. And these were really driven by PV legal obligations during this period. And you will see that prioritization, it's going to be really red line through my part of presentation. So again, I'm now presenting something what you most probably perfectly know. Pharmacovigilance has an impact on public health. There are clear legislative requirements for emergency. So these are perfectly defined. You will know Commission implementing regulation, and we have their part specifying what to do in case of urgency, and there is also business continuity described. So there are appropriate instructions for marketing authorization holders, what they should do. In Module 1, Guideline on Pharmacovigilance Practices, there is a section with critical pharmacovigilance processes and business continuity. So each marketing authorization holder should ensure business continuity in the following areas. And again, I think that these areas are not any surprise for us. So timely electronic transmission of individuals' case safety reports, 1590 calendar days, timely electronic submission of periodic safety update reports, then signal detection and evaluation, and continuous safety profile monitoring and benefit risk evaluation of authorized medicinal products. So this is something what was already in the legislation. So COVID didn't have any impact on this part of legislation, but Now I'm gonna talk about notice to stakeholders that was published in April 2020. So this was pretty soon after pandemic in Europe spread. So these are questions and answers on regulatory expectations for medicinal products for human use during the COVID-19 pandemic. And you can see that the last update was made in July 2020. And again, most probably, this is not any surprise that we are going to talk about reporting to vigilance, reporting of ICSRs into vigilance. However, we are going to talk also about medicinal drugs that are used to prevent or to treat the pathogen causing the pandemic. So these during the pandemic may increase. So that's what we can expect. Then risk that during a pandemic workforces in industry may be reduced due to high employee absenteeism. So it means that we might have reduced resources to ensure our work. So what is then recommended? And again, as I already said, prioritization, how marketing authorization holder should prioritize. First, submission of serious ICSRs associated with medicinal products used for the treatment or prevention of the pathogen causing the pandemic. Secondly, submission of other serious ICSRs. Third point, submission of non-serious ICSRs associated with medicinal products used for the treatment or prevention of the pathogen causing the pandemic. And fourth point, submission of other non-serious ICSRs. When I'm listing reporting and prioritization, essential for all marketing authorization holders should be to report all serious ICSRs within 15 days. And when the marketing authorization holder make use of prioritization, they shall put a note in the PSMF. So you have to have a note within PSMF if you decide to use prioritization. So you are allowed to reorganize and prioritize, but you should have a note in the PSMF. You have to have a record. The second part that is mentioned here is impact on corrective and preventive action management of CAPA under the PV provisions. So during the pandemic situation, marketing authorization holders might active business continuity plans and prioritize activities. Might activate business continuity plans and prioritize activities. So the prioritization should be temporary and should be described in deviations. And of course, we have to apply risk-based approach for this. So we have to take into account relative criticality of the deviation to risks impacting the pharmacovigilance system, processes and parts of processes. Any deviation from the processes and procedures should be duly recorded and as soon as identified, limited in time, and should be addressed and closed when the circumstances permit, so taking into consideration the management of backlogs. So you can see again risk-based approach to deviations and again recording. everything has to be perfectly documented. Moving to the next part. And we were talking about CAPAs. Now we are coming to the flexibility in planning and conduct of PV system audits. So marketing authorization holders may need to activate business continuity plans and prioritize activities. So what is impact on plant audits? And again, you can see risk-based approach is like crucial here. So you can adapt your plans, but you have to use risk-based approach. So everything and each decision has to be justified, documented, and you have to have sort of prioritization strategy. Focus audits should be prioritized, and alternative approaches such as remote audits should be considered. And again, I think that talking about legislation that was published 1 year ago, now we are pretty used to having or getting remote audits. This is pretty common now after 1 year of pandemic. So you have to consider if the specific audit might be independent and evaluate objectively. If you can use this methodology of remote audit, and if you can really mix interview with the document review, which is again pretty common for all audits, but if this specific audit is really if it is really possible to conduct this audit, and if you get uncertain results, so it would be good to do follow-up audit as soon as possible. So this is how this is described in this part of legislation. Coming to the next part, this is pretty similar, but this is focused on PV inspections. So this is a guidance for PV inspections because on-site inspections may not be possible. And we know that this was the case that, again, a lot of inspections we got were not on-site inspections. And again, prioritization, reduce or postpone certain activities, look for alternative ways, and again, risk-based approach. PV inspections that are part of PV inspection programs and can't be conducted on site, so a remote inspection may be considered. Focus inspections should be considered on case-by-case basis, and we have to consider whether a remote inspection is feasible, and there is of course purpose of the inspection, and if the purpose can be fulfilled. If we conduct remote inspections, so these should follow already existing guidelines and take into consideration limitations imposed by using a remote process. The inspectee should ensure the technical requirements to provide remote access, as well as maintains communication with and provides support to inspectors. During the remote inspection initiation phase, the inspectee should provide detailed information as requested by the inspectors to allow a feasibility assessment by the inspection team. I think that this is what we already had in legislation before COVID-19, but these points were considered as important to repeat it here also in light of COVID-19 inspections. Just for your information, there were also legislative requirements published for the US, and you can see that these are more or less similar to the EU. So guidance for managing pharmacovigilance in a pandemic reissued in March 2020. And this says during a pandemic, normal adverse event reporting processes should be maintained to the maximum extent possible. Firms should develop and prepare to implement their continuity of operations plan. And factors to consider in this operation plan should be activities that are directly relevant to the processing and submission of mandatory adverse event reports to FDA, and also to consider how PV sites are going to be affected. And if you are not able to perform activities, maintain documentation and inform FDA. And then FDA also provided prioritization for safety reporting. So you can see that this was not that different from what we had in the EU. What and how global pharma company should prioritize? And looking at what we had here, it means EU legislation, US guidance. We have to go and ensure activities that are under legal deadlines. So ICSR reporting, PCR reporting, signal detection, benefit risk. Then we have to consider local regional legislative requirements. Then we have plenty of different instructions that are ad hoc instructions. So we have to follow also these. And within the company, we should identify activities that might be postponed and evaluate risk of non-compliance. And of course, we have to consider products, and we might need to prioritize also products. What is crucial is the responsibilities of management. And you can imagine that if you don't have strong leadership within the company, so people are uncertain, they don't know exactly what to do, so they have to get strong instructions. So leadership should be really strong. Then we should follow business continuity plan, and that's something what we in pharmacovigilance we are setting it, we are testing it. So that's something what we somehow know. Then, as I mentioned, prioritization. So set priorities. Test and ensure working from home. IT support is essential. I think that now this really, really well tested within the companies, because almost all employees within companies are working from home. Then identify staff that is unable to work and critical number to function, allocation of critical duties, backups, staff interchangeability, communication between management and staff. And this is something what was really supported within our company, that we had much frequent meetings We couldn't meet face to face. Instead of that, we organized teleconferences. But at the beginning, we really followed our employees very closely and had a lot of meetings, so we know how they are doing, how if they can manage, if they can meet their aims, if performance is good, workload of these activities. So we really followed this closer than usual. So that's about my part. Now I'm coming to Marcela. So Marcela, your turn.
Thank you, Jana, for an interesting introduction and possible pharmacovigilance system adjustments in COVID pandemic. Let me continue with an overview of some important moments related to COVID pandemic. In January 2020, WHO issued public health emergency of international concern regarding COVID and declared it as a pandemic in March. In the meantime, MedDRA 23 was released, however adjusted just a few weeks afterwards to provide guidance regarding coding of COVID terms. Additional details were added in upcoming versions 23.1 and 24. As you may see, just a month after COVID pandemic was declared by WHO, EMA issued notice to stakeholders question and answers on regulatory expectations for medicinal products for human use, which was discussed by Jana earlier. And EMA also worked on detailed guidance on ICSRs and infrastructure for real-world monitoring of treatments and vaccines. In autumn, EMA published safety monitoring plan and guidance on risk management planning for COVID-19 vaccines. And finally, on 21st December 2020, EMA approved first COVID vaccine, Comirnaty from Pfizer-BioNTech. Let me provide more details, especially on MedDRA and EMA activities. First of all, detailed guidance on ICSRs in the context of COVID-19. It was initially published on 21st April and further updated in October last year. It provides recommendations for processing and submission of ICSRs associated with medicinal products used for the treatment or prevention of COVID-19 infection, taking into account a few pieces of legislation, the notice mentioned by Jana, the guidance regarding MedDRA, and also introduction to MedDRA-related terms. The document has two main sections. First one are reporting principles, followed by MedDRA COVID-19 coding guidance. Let me start with reporting principles. EMA highlights that organizations are reminded to comply with their legal obligations, as also stressed before by Jana, to report suspect ADRs in line with applicable legislation and provides detailed guidance on some aspects which may be relevant to the case management in the context of COVID-19. First of all, complete information needs to be submitted in a structured manner. Beyond the minimum criteria required for ICSR validation, reports should ideally contain precise information on demographics, vaccine brand, batch number, vaccination and reaction dates, outcome, concomitant drugs, etc. There is no submission needed for misuse of medicinal products which may contain substances also presented in medicinal products, like we do not report reports for swimming pool cleaner containing chloroquine phosphate. Similarly, no submission is required for off-label without ADR, as these are discussed in PSURs and RMPs. For lack of efficacy, there are three possible scenarios. If there is no ADR, associated and if product is used in accordance with authorization. As COVID-19 is potentially life-threatening, this should be submitted. However, if there is no ADR associated and if product is used off-label, it should not be submitted. And obviously, if there is valid ADR with lack of efficacy, this should be submitted as described in GVP. This is normal practice. EMA also repeated that for compassionate use and named patient use, the current guidance provided in GVP is still applicable, which means that requirements of concerned member states are to be followed and the report is classified as solicited if active collection is required in a given member state and classified as spontaneous if active collection is not required. Regarding monitoring of medical literature, again the reminder that marketing authorization holders shall not create duplicates in Vigilance by submitting ICSRs, which should be submitted by the MLM service. And also, marketing authorization holders should regularly screen the internet or digital media under their management or responsibility for potential reports of suspected adverse reactions. However, holders are not expected to search non-company sponsored digital media for potential reports, and if holder becomes aware of a report of suspected adverse reactions described in any of these sources, although not under their management, the report should be assessed if it qualifies for reporting. As I have mentioned earlier, the second part of the ICSR guidance is dedicated to MedDRA COVID-19 coding guidance. Let me just briefly repeat that MedDRA is issued twice a year. Main version is released on 1st March and becomes reporting version on 1st Monday in May. And in this version, we may expect changes at the high-level terms and above, along with LLTs and PTs changes. The other version, .1, is issued on 1st September and becomes reporting version 1st Monday of November. Let's have a look what happened last year. The ICH MedDRA Management Committee decided to provide the new coding 9 terms within the MedDRA dictionary in very expedited manner. So MedDRA 23 was issued as usual, however updated just 6 weeks later before it became reporting version to include COVID-19 terms. All users were urged to implement this re-released version 23 by 4th May 2020. Autumn release MedDRA 23.1 introduced new COVID-19 SMQ, which should be applied not only in reactions and events, but also in other relevant data elements such as those for medical history, indications, laboratory tests, etc. And again, in March this year, MedDRA 2024 was released, again adding new COVID-19 and vaccine-related terms. Although case management was the first area where guidance was provided to the industry expeditedly, there were also other activities where EMA issued COVID-tailored rules, knowing that safety data collected from a lot of people would need to be assessed, and also knowing that there were new vaccines approaching marketing authorization application and subsequent authorization. So let me give you some idea how EMA set up the infrastructure to handle this rare situation. In July 2020, EMA summarized the infrastructure for collection of safety data. The first initiative was Consign Project. The abbreviation stands for COVID-19 Infection and Medicines in Pregnancy, and its aim is to assess the impact of COVID-19 in pregnancy in order to guide decision-making about vaccine indications, vaccination policies, and treatment options for COVID-19 in pregnant women. In June 2020, EMA entered into contract with IQVIA to build a framework for the conduct of multi-center cohort studies on the use of medicine in COVID-19 patients. In May, EMA commissioned the Access Project for preparatory research into data sources and methods that can be used to monitor the safety, effectiveness, and coverage of COVID-19 vaccines in clinical practice, once authorized. Within this project, the common protocols for safety studies and the network of data sources will be available to holders and other stakeholders for joint pass studies. The project involves 22 research centers in Europe, and its main objectives are to identify and characterize a Europe-wide network of data sources that could provide a continuous monitoring of the coverage, safety, and effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines, and also to provide background rates of adverse events of special interest and other relevant conditions. Apart from these three projects for observational research, EMA also worked together with NCEP on strengthening methods, guidance, transparency, and international collaboration, resulting in 8th revision of the NCEP Guide on Methodological Standards in Pharmacoepidemiology, and also in creation of dedicated COVID-19 response group. And in addition, and as usual, the researchers are encouraged to register their pharmacoepidemiological studies in EU PASS register. And the last point I want to mention is fostering of international collaboration on observational research through the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, with the agreement to step up cooperation in 3 areas: pregnancy, building international clinical cohorts of COVID-19 patients, and preparing a strong infrastructure for monitoring the safety and effectiveness of vaccines. As you may see, the infrastructure for safety data collection, analysis, and reporting was set. But EMA also worked on guidance related to authorization of COVID-19 vaccines and developed Pharmacovigilance plan of the EU regulatory network for COVID-19 vaccines, which was issued in November 2020. The document provides an overview of the activities the EU regulatory network, both EMA and national competent authorities, will conduct once COVID vaccines are authorized. As all of us know, during the development phase of any medicine, a limited number of selected participants are included in clinical trials and followed up for a relatively short duration under controlled conditions. As a result, certain side effects, particularly rare or very rare ones, only emerge during real-life use in many different people. It is therefore essential to closely monitor the safety and effectiveness of any medicine after it is authorized, and due to the extent of pandemic, the specific plan was developed with these main objectives. First of all, active collection of data on rare potential risks. Then, rapid detection, prioritization, and assessment of emergent safety information. Prompt evaluation of the impact of detected safety issues and benefit-risk balance of the vaccines. Active surveillance of vulnerable populations. Engagement and collaboration with stakeholders, including vaccinees, healthcare professionals, marketing authorization holders, and international partners. And also prompt and effective communication of new information arising from the above activities. Having in mind these objectives, let's have a look at individual sections. The first is RMP. The GVP includes detailed requirements and also provides a template for RMP. In addition, EMA published consideration on the core RMP requirements for COVID-19 vaccines to facilitate and harmonize the preparation of RMPs by companies and their evaluation by assessors. The core RMP 19 addresses the planning of the post-authorization safety follow-up of COVID-19 vaccines, while acknowledging uncertainties in the pandemic setting and recommending ways to prepare for pharmacovigilance activities. The core RMP 19 document provides section-by-section guidance and requirements for drafting the RMP of COVID-19 vaccine. Another chapter is on periodic safety reports, where marketing authorization holders are expected to submit to the agency not only regular PSURs, but also so-called summary monthly safety reports in addition. And if you look at the content, you may see that case reports should be divided into various subgroups, like per age, special population, per high-level terms or SOCs, or per country, and similar split is required also for patients' exposure. Not surprisingly, signals ongoing and closed in the interval need to be included as well as any adverse events of special interest and any reports related to RMP safety concerns, fatal reports, and any risk-benefit considerations. Regarding collection of exposure data, member states will be gathering this data in various manners, for instance by implementing national health data registers to collect information on individual vaccinations, and EMA will collect and compile this data from member states. Vaccines also need to comply with requirements for product and batch traceability, from the release by the manufacturer through the entire distribution chain to the actual vaccination. The use of traceability tools, such as stickers, should be described in the RMP. For COVID-19 vaccines, the need for observational path studies will be carefully considered, as routine activities and ongoing or planned clinical trials may not be sufficient to provide adequate data to further characterize identified and potential risks and investigate missing information. As mentioned earlier, EMA has contracts in place with academic and private partners to support the readiness of research networks to perform observational research, including on COVID-19 treatments and vaccines. We talked about Access Project, Consign Project, and as well NCEPT initiatives and EU Pass Register earlier. As mentioned before, in addition to GVP, the agency has also published detailed guidance on ICSRs in the context of COVID-19. And it's worth mentioning that upon authorization, all COVID-19 vaccines will be subject to additional monitoring to enhance the reporting of suspected adverse reactions. If we turn our attention to signal management, GVP product or population-specific considerations for vaccines outline specific considerations for signal detection in mass vaccination campaigns. It is anticipated that a high volume of ICSRs related to COVID-19 vaccines will be sent to spontaneous reporting systems, including Vigilance, and that routine signal detection methods may be insufficient to screen such a volume of data efficiently and effectively. And both EMA and NCAs within Prague's signal management are testing several possible methodologies how to make it more efficient. In line with the prioritization principles outlined in GVP Module 9, Timelines should be expedited as much as possible throughout the management of potential signals for COVID-19 vaccines, although this should not be at the expense of a thorough evaluation. For instance, the 30-day time frame for the confirmation of validated signal may need to be shortened to allow for discussion of the signal at the forthcoming Prague meeting. As we are in the phase of massive vaccination with new vaccines against new disease, the prompt exchange of information is critical. Therefore, the agency engages with EU networks of patients, consumers, and healthcare professionals and disseminates any relevant information on COVID-19 vaccines to their organizations. The agency has also regular interactions with regulators in countries outside the EU, like FDA, Health Canada, or international public health organizations such as WHO. In these forums, discussions on specific safety topics take place as necessary and in compliance with the confidentiality agreements in place. In addition, the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Agencies provides a framework for exchanging information on COVID-19 related initiatives and best practices. Exchanges between holders, rapporteurs at EMA committee level and EMA itself will take place whenever warranted to discuss any emergent information on the benefit-risk balance of the vaccine. And indeed, we can see it in last weeks. However, information cannot be only collected, analyzed, reported, or exchanged within predefined channels and working groups. Some of them need to be also publicly available. Therefore, in addition to already established EMA transparency practices, the agency has put in place exceptional transparency measures in relation to COVID-19 vaccines and treatments approved or under evaluation. And also, the scope of the meeting highlights from Prague has also been extended to include information on other safety procedures involving COVID-19 treatments and vaccines, including signals, PSURs, PAS, and RMPs. At this EMA webpage, you may find the comparison of standard transparency practices and practices for COVID-19 medicines. It covers not only pharmacovigilance, like highlighted publication of the full RMPs, published monthly safety updates vaccines, or assessment of signals, but also extended transparency in regulatory topics like product information, EPARs, etc. So that was actually my last slide. So let me summarize that today. Jana talked about impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on global pharma companies, business continuity, and prioritization. And I subsequently spent some time on updates or more detailed guidances with respect to safety management of COVID-19 treatments and vaccines. Thank you for your attention, and I believe we may open the Q&A session. Flo, back to you.
Thank you very much, Marcela and Jana. We have a few questions to answer, so let's see if we can answer a couple of them now while we still have just a bit of time. Our first question will be, have you had to prioritize PV activities? If yes, please share how it was ensured and how it was described in PSMF. Who would like to answer this question?
Floriana speaking. Maybe I can try to answer these questions. So fortunately, we couldn't have to prioritize PV activities. So everything was more or less covered as usually. The reason, most probably the reason, is that also we are we can work remotely. We are used to working remotely, and there were still some capacities within Pharmacovigilance. But if I have to do that, so I would probably describe activities, and within PSMF, most probably I would describe the section or the activities in specific sections of PSMF. So that would be my answer to your question, but I don't have any deep experience with this.
Thank you, Jana. We have time for one more question. Is there any guidance regarding addressing additional pharmacovigilance activity or measures with respect to COVID-19 vaccine? Who would like to take this question?
Yeah, Flo, Marcela speaking. I think I can take this one. Yes, indeed, there is a guidance, and I'm sorry I didn't stress that during the presentation. There is this document, Core RMP 19, providing section by section recommendation and comments how to address individual RMP chapters. So in general, with respect to additional PV activities, it is an expectation that there may be ongoing clinical trials. I have said that observational post-authorization safety studies will be either considered or required, as well as pregnancy registries. And actually, EMA has projects exactly on these topics. And in the terms of risk minimization measures, the document, the core RMP 19 says that in principle for COVID-19 vaccines, routine risk minimization measures like product information could be considered sufficient. And indeed, as full RMPs for vaccines are published on EMA web pages, you may see that all of them until now were approved without any additional risk minimization measures. Thank you, Flo.
Thank you very much, Marcela and Jana. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have today. We would like to answer everyone who has taken the time to ask a question, so we'll take the time to reply via email to all our outstanding questions. To conclude our webinar session for today, we'd like to thank everyone once again for joining us. We hope you find this webinar useful. To remind you, this webinar will be available for download and watch again from the Pharmacovigilance website very soon. This ends our webinar session for today. Thank you very much.